All right. So, super happy that you're joining me, Vinai, to have a quick overview of how Hyva works and some general questions people might have. I've shared a little preview with you, so you could have an idea of how things work.
Yeah.
And play around with it a little bit, because I need to get rid of this imposter syndrome and get some approval from some people that they actually think that this is ready enough to get people started. And obviously, at Integer we've been working with it for a few months now. We're doing 5 simultaneous builds at the moment. Algentos and Groningen, they're doing the first project. They have been working on it for a month now. And they're also they're very satisfied and said they're going to do a lot more projects with it. I got a lot of requests after last Thursday, people that are very eager to get their hands on it. And I've had to tell them to wait just a little bit longer, because I need to get my legal things in order, and I was working on the licensing and everything. So that will take a few more days, but hopefully next week I can let the first people actually dive in and get started. But there's questions and people. Well, of course, at Reacticon at the talk, I didn't have that much time to really go into the nitty-gritty details of how the team is actually working. And the most common question from people is what the workflow looks like. So how do you change things? And I've taught people that it's not the best idea to inherit on the main team, but to actually copy the team to your own directory and then own that code, so to say. I want to give a little bit of reasoning as to why we've made these kind of decisions. And then I think it's interesting to show a little bit how Tailwind UI is working in Hyvä Themes. So if I go to my default theme, and as I said, the workflow would be, if you start a new project, that you actually copy the default theme into your own namespace. So it goes into app design frontend, and you copy the base theme. And ideally, if, for example, you know that you're not going to use the customer account area, you start removing stuff. And you get less layout, you get less blocks. There's just less weight that you have in your team, which then makes it quicker. But there's a more important thing here, and that's purely based on the amount of CSS that we're shipping, and how we're keeping that amount as small as possible. And in the core of that is how Tailwind works. And you can see in our Tailwind config, which is basically your theming configuration file, where your different color schemes are defined, and it tells Tailwind which classes it should generate for your front end. And we've built the default template with a color scheme that relies heavily on a primary, secondary, and background or container style. And that means that if you look at, for example, the footer is defined, contains classes like BG container darker. And that basically means that it takes the container color from the background configuration. So we have background colors, and here we have the container. So that forms BG container. And then we have free flavors, so to say. If you just say BG container, you get the default color, which you can see here is a medium gray color. Then you have a dark and a lighter shade. And that enables you to play around with different sections, where here we have a BG container darker. And if I just remove the darker parts, you get a slightly lighter background color, like you see is also used in this one here. So if I want to make this section here a bit darker, so basically flip the colors between what you just saw, and now the footer is a tint lighter, and the copyright part is a color darker. And that's basically how we set up all the elements in the default theme to vary it between these colors. So if you also look at when I add a product to the cart, this is also a container, and it uses container lighter, which is basically white. Yeah, it is white. And I could easily change that color to a slightly darker color, but just adding darker to the BG container. And the same goes for the buttons. We use the primary color for buttons, which you can see also in the background primary. I use the Tailwind color scheme, and then primary defaults to value 500 from Tailwind colors. So you could pretty much, let's change the color of the primary button. Let's say we want to use yellow, and so my primary background color now defaults to yellow. Then I go to, where am I? Yeah, okay, source, render, and then Hyva, default theme, and then web CSS, Tailwind. Okay, so in my web Tailwind directory, in my package.json, I have to find a few scripts which you can use to generate the Tailwind classes. And if you use build dev, it builds the entire Tailwind library of CSS classes. So I can show you, if you use npm run build dev, it runs a few scripts, and it outputs done. Everything is slightly slower while both recording and streaming, but still pretty fast. Network, and then if you check CSS, so previously my CSS file was uncompressed 100 kilobytes, 15 kilobyte compressed. Now I generated the entire Tailwind suite, and it's 2.1 megabytes unzipped. You can also see that the button color changed. Along with the primary background color, I can set the primary border color, and border color primary. Let's also switch this to yellow. And basically, yellow 100 till 900 are different shades of yellow, where 100 is the lightest and 900 is the darkest. So I've pretty much mapped those values so that a primary background color is 500 by default, and the border, I think if it's set to primary darker, and then it defaults to 600, so it's a bit darker. Let me rerun the development bundle of Tailwind. And now the border's also changed. So there's a lot more into the CSS part of this. We don't only use utility classes. So if you look at the source code, you see all these width 100 and width full for the smaller screen size, and order and all these utility classes. But at the same time, we've defined a few of those ourselves, but as less as possible, because that's the how they advise you to use Tailwind. And we're building a full-featured theme, and then trying to abstract some parts of it that we know that we use a lot. So one thing is a button, and a button primary, and if I would set it to button secondary, you get a different color scheme, where you can see. And we have, so default components, we have a few things set. So for example, for swatches, it's very minimalistic. We apply Tailwind classes here to, for example, for swatch options, to set the width and the height to a value of 6, which translates to some EM or REM value. And the beauty of this is that, well, now we've run the dev bundle. If we run the prod bundle, so the production bundle, what actually happens is I've defined that here. It's going to purge my CSS, and it's going to look into my team directory. I've defined where that directory and which files those are. And it subtracts all the Tailwind classes that you actually used and only puts those into the final CSS file. So if I reload it now, you will see that the file came back to just 15 kilobytes gzip, or 100 kilobytes uncompressed. And that brings me to the point why I would very much advise to own your own team directory and copy the theme from the vendor directory, because if you don't, you get all your custom HTML that you've written yourself in your own team and modules that you write, and that adds to the CSS. And then on top of that, you're also telling Tailwind to scaffold the team directory in vendor with all the HTML files that you're not even using. So you might end up with the double amount of CSS files. And it depends. If you want to fully optimize your team and get the best score, I would say this is the way. If you're looking a bit more at maintainability and looking at the future, if you want to lift along with us when we bring out new features and everything, you could create a child team, or at least get started with a child team. And if you feel like you want to optimize further, you still copy our default theme and throw out everything that you don't use. But this is one of the fundamentals why our CSS is so darn small, and which brings the best score to Google PageSpeed.
Can I ask a question?
Briefly? Yeah, absolutely. Yes, please.
So if I understood correctly, if I were to use all the PHTML file, all the classes that already are defined in the normal PHTML files that you wrote, so just moving stuff around and redefining values in the configuration, so it's different color theme, I could use a child theme and wouldn't have additional CSS be generated because it's still the same class, just different values, correct?
Yeah, if you choose not to customize heavily, if you choose not to throw out a lot of functionalities, you can absolutely still build a child theme. And well, the fact is that this might become a very fully featured theme. We're making decisions. We're really putting weight on every functionality that we add, and we ask ourselves, do we really need it? And well, it's the way that PWA Studio, for example, and every new modern headless solution is doing it. Things that the 1% is using, you can build it as additional, or it becomes bespoke and you develop it yourself. But we're going to try to make this a fit for, let's say, 80% of the market, and make it the best way possible for that 80%, so that it's fast, it's fun, it's very easy to customize, and It's also important, I think, to say that especially in this stage of the project, the product is really aimed at those that do custom development, freelancers and agencies that are used to writing their own team code and know how to get around in the Magento front end. Because they can get started today and build out these features that they need, build their own features using the Alpine JS that looks very much like Vue. I think when a product matures and we get more and more features built in, and especially we made a lot of third-party modules compatible, then it becomes more interesting for those that just want to install something and have it work. But one of the caveats, or the caveats, one of the downsides to our approach is that third-party modules currently won't work with Hyva unless you rewrite the HTML files to at least have a JavaScript that doesn't use require.js and knockout and jQuery. While it's still perfectly possible to include jQuery, if you want to have another few hundred kilobytes of library loaded into it, you can reuse a lot of the code from core Magento, and it's basically what I'm doing myself as well. If you look at the toolbar that I've written, most of the code that's being used here to switch to URL, if you look at the script part here, a lot of the options that are in this component came directly from core Magento. I was able to just take the heart of that module, that JavaScript module, refactor it a bit, and keep most of the logic. And just to get these dropdowns working, and the pagination and everything, apart from the styling. Styling was a bit more work, but just getting the JavaScript part to work by porting it from the core module to Hyva, that took less than an hour. Well, yeah. Okay. You wanted to ask something?
Yes, please. I hope that doesn't impact the reusability of the recording if I ask a question like this here. One thing I was really wondering about, maybe you could show me an example here. You were talking about in your presentation that you wanted to create more components that can be used from templates and blocks or from like UI widgets that are created in the backend. Could you show me an example of how one of those would look like?
So then you mean that I told that components like these will be turned into widgets, so you can add them from the backend. So there's two things. One, I want to build out a library of UI elements which you can pick from. For example, the mini card is completely detached from the rest of the page. It's isolated in its functionality, where the button, if you click the card button here, it fires an event. At click, it dispatches toggle cards. And the container that contains this drawer listens for the toggle card events, which you can see here, toggle card window, then open is true. So when I click this button, it mutates the open state, it sets it to true, and then this component opens up magically. It doesn't matter where I've defined this section with the card drawer. That could be anywhere in my HTML. I could have two card drawers and it would still work. The idea is that an element like this card drawer should easily be replaceable by a classic drop-down mini card like the Luma team has. So if you write a PHTML file based on this element, and it also receives the trigger, the dispatch event open. It receives the card data from section data. That's on page load. It's automatically loaded. So if I want to create a drop-down element here, like a tooltip kind of mini card, it's just a matter of writing different HTML and a different layout, and you could just swap the PHTML file. And we have the idea to build a library of these kind of elements. So you can have your pick what the mini card should look like. And if you want to have different menu styles, so for example, this is a drop-down menu. That's just one PHTML file that contains the entire menu structure, including the drop-down here with sliding stuff. If you look at the Hyvä side, it uses a different HTML file for this menu, and I could just swap this for the one that this team is using, and I'll have drop-downs. This is a simplified version of the menu. It also has a mobile state where it turns into a hamburger icon. I imagine, well, the next thing for an actual project that we're doing, I need to create a mega menu. So that means I will have a drop down that's over the full width of the page. On mobile, it will look the same like a drawer from the side, but we'll build out a whole list of categories. So you have products and brands in the top of the, so in your header. And if you hover over products, you get a mega menu that lists all the product types that they have with the submenus. And it's one of the most requested things from a lot of merchants to have this really nice mega menu. And if you look at regular themes, the way the menu structure is requested with loops, like models in the loop, and the performance is really, really bad. And we want to provide a very good performance.
Lovely.
Yeah, so and that would basically use the same JSON or the same generation as, so the same view model that generates this tree structure for the menu. We can also use for the mega menu, it's just a different HTML file that contains a different layout. And the same goes for the footer. We'll have a footer that has 4 containers next to each other. We'll have one that just has 2 containers and it has a newsletter on the side. And regarding widgets, currently, the slider here, for example, that's one HTML file that does a GraphQL request. And I want to turn that into a more versatile widget that you can also control from the backend. So I'm doing that here, for example. This one is called from the CMS. And currently I call it as a block in what's it called, directory, you know, within brackets. Directives. I'm using directives in the CSS to call it as a widget, but I want to build it out a little bit more so that you can actually select it from the WYSIWYG editor and select the options like from which categories and from which price range do you want to show products. I can actually show it's
basically a widget. Okay.
Yeah, so I want to turn those into widgets, and that goes for a lot of the layout elements. Like here you have a 2-column card element that's usually called in Tailwind. So if you have, I'm using it throughout the whole theme. So the slider here contains cards. That's basically a small container with a UI element. I'm using that throughout the whole site. And that's just one configuration. It's maybe also nice to show if you go into probably theming, you have button and then card. If I, so in this theme, you can see the corners are slightly rounded. If I would switch it to LG and I want to change the container color, container darker, and then regenerate my CSS. Then all these elements, you see the background color changed and the corners are more rounded, and that's used throughout the whole theme. So that goes for this element, but also well, in the case of this theme, it's also these containers that I use here. If you go to customer login, we also have 2 containers here, and so you have one place where you can control what those containers look like. And we're going to abstract a few of these things like this, but not too much because it adds to the CSS weight, and it's well, it's for maintainability, and especially for isolating these UI elements. That's really at the core of Tailwind UI. And you can see a Tailwind CSS, and you can see an example. Tailwind UI is the commercial package with UI elements for well, to use with Tailwind. And this is one of the great things that you could do. You could buy a Hyva license and get this whole theme with all the UI elements that we handcrafted, but then also take a Tailwind UI license, which is $250, and you get an entire library of UI elements that you can use for different kind of layouts. You just take the code from here, copy it into a HTML file, create a widget out of it, whatever you want, and you have predefined elements that are fully responsive. And so we have a license for Tailwind UI, so we're allowed as an agency to use it for our clients. So the Hyva site, the Hyva IO site, uses a few of these components. Let me think.
It's not expensive.
No, it's super cheap, and it enables you to get a lot of styling done immediately. Like if you want to have footer elements, so we'll build a few different footer layouts. But if you want, you can get a license from Tailwind and have all of these things predefined. So building a good-looking footer becomes super easy then. It has all the social media icons and different. Well, this is just really one of the powers of using Tailwind. And we want to take that idea of mobility of UI elements and interchangeable. We want to take that into the core of Hyvä Themes, so that, well, if you want to have different cards, different footers, all of these things, you can just swap them and it will just work. And yeah, well, we've seen that prototyping and building UI components, like the card, it's fully built with Alpine.js. It uses GraphQL, so if you make a change here, it does a request. So all request here, GraphQL, you can see it has all the fancy stuff. Update the card, and then the new data comes in, and the price updates here. And yeah, we'll have plenty of different of these elements, and traditionally from Magento, it's been from the Luma team, it's been quite hard to reuse these kind of elements and build them in a way that, well, imagine that you could just take a part of a checkout or any UI component, that you could just take it and put it anywhere. It's with all the XML and all the dependencies to JavaScript files and the whole dependency tree. It's just impossible to move things around like this.
They're such a mess. Honestly, yeah. Okay.
So
cool.
that's
I like it a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to working more with it.
Other things, I've kind of touched on the core principles, shown a little bit how the theming works. Well, I can show. Yeah.
I guess for upgrades, just thinking about that a bit further, if you were to, let's say I start a new theme, so I copy everything according to your recommendation into app design, right? And build my own theme, and now you release an upgrade and it contains a lot more new, well, components I want to use on my page. Just gives me a lot more power, whatever, more configuration values I can set, whatever. So for an upgrade, I guess what then would need to be done is I would have to compare, well, I could take any new files, just merge them into the existing one directly. But then for the existing files, of course, I would somehow have to figure out what changed, which ones actually were changed and which ones are just partially changed, and move those in, right?
Yeah, so the idea is I'm subtracting some of the core ideas from the team into an assisting module. So we have the reset team, then we have the Hyvä team, which is a child of the reset team, and then we have a module that's called the Magento 2 team module for Hyvä. And in here, we assemble all the view models, for example, for a footer and for the navigation, for a product page. So they live outside of the team. And you'll be able to upgrade this module anytime. It shouldn't break anything unless we clearly communicate what changed and what it might break. Then there's a few things that we currently still have in the team, which is going to move to this module. And that's basically the core logic of the team, which is how section data is being loaded, which is how cookies are being read and injected into the messages component. So basically, if you take a product and then add it to the cart, now it reads a cookie it reads a cookie which contains messages, and it looks at the section data and pulls those messages, creates an event, and this messages component receives that event with the messages. That logic will move into the team module. And we fought quite long and hard on how to prevent stuff from breaking, and that's the whole event-based idea. So because all this component does is listen for an event that receives messages, it's pretty stupid. It's a very dumb element. It's a UX element. It receives data and then makes it look nice and adds a little. Yeah,
that's the nice thing about event observer pattern, right? It's decouples things. That's why event observers still are better than plugins, because plugins are hard coupling. Event observers aren't.
Yeah, so you should see the whole team. You should see the whole team as loosely coupled, and those events won't change. So
okay.
I'm building the configuration options. And as soon as you change an option here, it will trigger an event that contains the selected option and price that's attached to that option. So if it adds €5 or $5 to the product price, it fires an event, price change with the ID of the product, and the price component here listens for the event price change with that ID. And I could have a price box here, but I could also have a scrolling price with a button, add to cart button, completely somewhere else on my page. It just listens for the price change event and then updates the price. So that could live anywhere on my page. And those events won't change. So even if I change logic or we change logic to the way the section data is being loaded, if that becomes more complex or contains more features, that won't break the way that these events are working. So that's the whole modularity and the swappable component thing, event-based and isolated. So the brain and that will live in the module. You can update the module, and the team. Well, how often So here's what happens typically if you're using Luma. You override 1 or 2 HTML files, and that's your team, maybe 50
Right.
files. And the rest lives in the parent team. Now an update comes from Magento, and they change a parent HTML file that now contains a different ID, a new view module, something like this.
Apologies, I've got a hard cutoff actually at 5:30 now. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I would, well, you know,
We've covered so much. We've covered a lot.
But I will definitely continue to talk with you about this in the future. So I'm looking forward to it.
Me too.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time. And,
thank you too.
We'll
and yeah, looking forward to talking again soon. Thank you for this. I like it a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks, Willem. Bye.
Okay. Ciao.